And at just about 11 o'clock, you are listening to KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. My name is Mike Hagan. This is Radio Orbit. I'll be back with you in just a few minutes.
And the reason for that is I really wanted to explore the underlying structure of how I understand the nature of being human, the nature of this lack, this dissatisfaction that we have, and try to look at a uniquely radical theological perspective on that. So it hopefully makes sense. I think I was inspired to do this because I was talking to a good friend who is very into the Enneagram. And as we were talking, I was kind of articulating my kind of concerns. And then I thought, okay, this should be quite interesting because there's lots of people who I know, lots of good friends who are interested in the Enneagram. And there's a lot of people who engage with Richard Moore, who's very into that, and also inside of my work. And I thought, okay, this would be an interesting place to get into the similarities and differences. So in the description for this seminar, you notice that I mentioned things like depth psychology, progressive Christianity, liberal Christianity, humanism. And I say that there's something different about what higher theologies do than those variety of things. And at first they can all look very different. So you've got things like depth psychology or analytical psychology. I think of something like Jung. You have the Enneagram, something like Moore. You've got progressive Christianity, liberal Christianity. You've got humanism, which seems very different as well. What I want to argue is that actually at a structural level, they all come to a very similar place. It's the same with new spirituality as well. How we're fit into this. Confessional Christianity, I think, can fit into this. So there's this whole group of things. As I say, people would often think that they're very, very different. Like, what does liberal Christianity have to do with this? But I want to talk about how in the midst of their differences there is something that they share. And what is that? So we'll start there. Okay, so what they share, I would say, is that they have a similar notion of where we start from, where we are presently, these three dimensions, where we come from, where we are, and where we're going. And its most traditional understanding, you can say that there was once a time of fullness, of wholeness, of wholeness that was in the past. We currently live in a state of fallenness or of a sense of separation or lack or dissatisfaction. And we want to return to this place of wholeness and completeness that kind of lies in front of us. Now then, you can have various ways of interpreting that. For example, one might say that this sense of dissatisfaction and this lack of experiencing means is an illusion. It isn't real. What we need to do is simply see through the illusion and realize that we are all. There is no separation, there is no lack. This is just an illusion that we others might want to say, no, it's however, you have more Eastern types of religion that tend towards saying that this is a great thing. Western forms of religion, you have more the sense that there is a chasm that needs to be bridged. You have this thing about those tracks where you have God on one side, humans on the other, and this gap between the two, and then the cross fits in the middle, right? Closing the gap.
Yeah, all right. Welcome to the program, everyone. It's Mike, and you are listening to Radio Orbit. Good evening. Good morning. Good day, whoever you are, wherever. And whenever you might be listening, welcome to the program. It is Radio Orbit. We do this every Monday night, looking at the cutting edges in science and technology and nature and art and music, medicine this year a lot, sometimes strange and unusual, Always interesting, though, and usually pretty cool. You're listening to it Monday, August 10th, 2019. I hope things are going well for you and you're enjoying the evening. It's a stormy Monday night here in mid-Missouri. I do not think that I've seen it rain so hard in quite some time. Out at my place, we had nearly 2 inches of rain in about half an hour. And that's a whole lot of water, people. Anyhow, I hope you're staying dry and comfy and ready to snuggle up and listen to another Radio Orbit program. You might take a look outside. Maybe it's clearing up a little bit. Take a look at the skies. Got a little bit of a moon up there, and we've got the Perseid meteor shower peaking sometime in the next couple of days, but definitely available to your gaze if you take a look. Anyway, you can adjust the attitude one way or the other. Get ready for the program. I do it every night if I can. It's good medicine, all right? Okay, regardless, good to be with you on this summer night. And let's take care of a few thank yous and get on to the show, all right? All right, before all the fun, let's say thank you to the excellent people that keep this radio station humming, both on the air and off, 24/7, 365, virus or no virus. They just kick ass. KOPN, the staff and crew, keeping the station jamming, and really a remarkable group of humans up here. On Mondays, Woody gets it rolling with traditional and classic country, along with Ameripolitan music from 3 to 6 p.m., more country than ever, with the Real Deal Country Show. Tech radio guys taking over at 6 o'clock, talking about the wild and wacky world of high technology, moving so quickly. Kelvin jamming as usual on Jazz Plus Blues equals Rabbit Hole Navigation Part 2. And just concluding, New Wave Radio Theater, Arcadia. We got the whole program in this time. And yeah, good music, good talk, good news. 89.5 on the dial. And streaming all around this wacky world at www.kopn.org. It's your imagination station, KOPN Columbia. I'm on the web at mikehagan.com. Check out the podcast. You can get all these programs magically appearing in your playlist or on your player every time that they are put up there on the web. All right. Big thanks to all of you, by the way, for listening and participating. Appreciate the feedback. Email, Twitter, Instagram. Hi to Nick out there in Germany. We got to get your music on the air here one of these days, my friend. And that's my bad. But good to hear from you, and we'll be featuring music from Nick sometime before the end of the world here. Everyone else, hello to you as well. Cheers. Keep it up. I like to hear from people, and it's always interesting and good to hear what you got to say. Always feel free to message me, whether it's a potential guest or a topic that you want to hear maybe, or music that you'd like to hear played. Maybe you are a musician. Maybe you're an artist, poet, and you've got something you want to share. Love to do that, okay? All right. Last week, part 1 of my rabbit hole navigation show with Jonathan Zap. And we had a great talk with John last week. So good, in fact, that we are going to do it again tonight. We did this purposely, as a matter of fact. There was enough to cover that there's quite a bit of topics that we have on the list that we didn't get to last time. So yeah, once again, we're going to do part 2 of Rabbit Hole Navigation with Jonathan Zap. All right, if you missed that show, check out the podcast. Like I said, I didn't get the archives and the regular website updated. I had a crazy week. I won't go into that. But at any rate, the show is up there. And if you're clever, you can find it on the website. But the easy way is just go to the podcast. And you don't even have to subscribe to the podcast. You can just listen to it right from there. And you can do that right from my front homepage there at mikehagan.com. All right. All right, but the archives for all of the previous shows with Jonathan, and we've done quite a few of them, are there, and a number of other things that I like to keep track of, including music and some news that we do on the Radio Orbit forum. You can click over there and post questions and comments and stories and YouTubes and BitTubes and any kind of tube you want, and you go just trip on over to mikehagan.com and click on the button that says Radio Orbit Forum, and you can join about 325 other people and give me a whole bunch of trouble. Okay. Anyway, tonight, like I said, I'm excited to have John with us. He'll be with us for the rest of the evening. He's one of my favorite guests here on Orbit, and always someone with interesting insight and foresight, regardless of the subject matter, it seems. Always cool and fun when we get to hear from John. So we're going to do that in a few minutes. If you want to get a leg up, check out Jonathan's website at zaporacle.com. You can also check out his YouTube channel at Zap Oracle. Both of those can be accessed from the front page of my website at mikehagan.com. So check out his website. It's really cool as well. And we'll be back with him in just a few minutes. For the tunes tonight, once again, because just like John, I didn't get enough of them last week. Music tonight from Skinshape. We started the show off with a tune called Life is One. In fact, the song that I ended the program with last week. So, all right, it's Mike, and you're listening to Radio Orbit. I'll be back with Jonathan Zap in just a few minutes.
listening to Radio Orbit with Mike Hagan on KOPN 89.5 FM.
Yes, it's true. You are listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia 89.5 FM. And I am Mike Hagan. Last week we had the pleasure of spending the entire length of the program with Mr. Jonathan Zap. We are going to continue along the path of the luminous this evening once again with Jonathan Zap. He's an author, a wonderful video producer, and one of my favorite guests. And here he is once again, and I'm glad he's with me. Hello, Jonathan. Thank you for being here once again.
Hey, Mike.
Hi.
Good to be back.
Yeah. How's it going tonight, man?
Excellent.
All right, so for the folks who maybe were with us last week and maybe for those who weren't, I'd like to do a quick review of some of the things we talked about last week. Not much, but just a few things. I've got a quick little list here. And if you can kind of say a couple words maybe about those things, just to kind of bring people up to speed, and then we will just kind of continue down the rabbit hole, all right?
Okay. You just tell me the list. I'll try and summarize it.
All right. First thing, we talked about rabbit holes in general, that we are all rabbit hole navigators, myself, you, and everybody else out there. We talked about individual lives as rabbit hole adventures, and relationships with other people as rabbit hole adventures. And in the sense of rabbit hole, like we think about in Alice in Wonderland, a strange, remarkable experience. We talked about liminality, the edges of things. We talked about phenomenology, and we talked about true skepticism. So those are the four things I'd like you to just kind of say a couple things about.
Okay. So the basic idea is that a rabbit hole navigator is another way of saying a human being, because we are navigating between dimensions. The most familiar example is waking and dreaming. When we're dreaming, we're in a very different matrix, an idioplastic matrix, a thought-responsive matrix, where the rules of reality shift. But the rules of reality also shift when we have a relationship, because other people live by, have a different reality definitions than we do. And so things like liminality relate to being in a between and betwixt place, like, hypnopompic and hypnagogic state when you're falling asleep or when you're waking up from sleep.
Yes.
Breaking up from a relationship would be a liminal state when you're between relationships, for example. And then a way of one of the skills of navigation, that's sort of the territory that we're navigating, but some of the skills include true skepticism and phenomenology. The true skeptic, it was a school of Greek philosophy. We withhold from conclusions so that we increase our powers of thinking and observation by not being overly formatory or reaching premature conclusions about things. And phenomenology means that we never assume that we've seen the noumena, the thing that's really behind the phenomenon. That's really impossible for us to perceive, including when we're looking at the physical world. And so we have the humility to realize, this is one of the reasons why we avoid conclusions, is that we are never fully seeing anything, and therefore we relate to it on its own terms, but without reaching a definite conclusion about exactly what it is, unless it's something that's so mundane and it's just impractical not to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, that's great. A great summary. And this whole adventure of life is a rabbit hole, and there are tricks and tools that can help you find your way. And that's what we're talking about. We talked about it last week, and we're going to continue tonight. So, speaking of tricks, that's the next thing on my list, and it's a big one, and one that we can spend some time on. Tricksters and reality testing. It's an archetype, certainly the trickster archetype, but I'd like you to expand on that, and let's talk about it as much as we need to.
Okay, well, the trickster is one of the most basic archetypes we find find it in all cultures. Sometimes it's related to an animal like a coyote or a crow. And tricksters are liminal figures. They violate hierarchies. They disrespect authority. And, there can be positive trickster cases and negative trickster cases. So we have a president right now who is a personification of some of the dark aspects of the trickster archetype.
I have that on my list. I was going to ask Trump as trickster, ?
Yeah, no, he definitely is. And he violates all these expected norms and hierarchies and, uses language. He sort of weaponizes language, the idea that we have an expectation of people are supposed to be sort of truth sayers and they're supposed to be speaking factually. And, he's famously transactional. And he's a, real estate salesman, but known to be a highly unethical one. And so
famously transactional. I love it, John.
Just hyperbolically lies about anything. I mean, he's been clocked at, what is it up to now, 30,000 lies or something, according to the Washington Post. And so he's a huge trickster, but he also seems like the trickster function of the cosmos. I've written about 20 articles about Trump, but one of them is called, why the Trumpocalypse, swallow the red pill. The Trumpocalypse indicates you live in a simulated matrix. There are just so many improbable things about him being elected where no one, including him, thought it was going to happen. And then his name means a trick winning card. Of course, the family name was really Drump. But they changed it to Trump. But there's so many elements, including like a 19th century story about Baron Trump, and a TV show from the 1950s where there's a character named Walter Trump, who's a charlatan who comes to this western town and tells them, you got to pay me to build a wall or the world is going to end, and this kind of thing.
Hey, for a minute, Jonathan, please talk. You mentioned that the trickster character is an archetype. Could you give an example or two of a character like that in mythology? I mean, pick any particular culture that you like, maybe.
The Joker in Batman, obviously.
That's not what I was expecting, but yes.
Heath Ledger's Joker is a pretty good one. The trickster Bugs Bunny would be a more positive trickster, but you'll find them in everywhere if you look for them.
Did you see the new Joker with Joaquin Phoenix? What did you think of it? I mean, it's a side note, but I thought it was a remarkable performance.
Well, it was, but there was also sort of a trickster function going on that was mind-blowing when I was watching the movie, because when he would go to visit his mom, they spliced two different neighborhoods together in New York. One was right near where I went to high school. It was a subway stop near the Bronx High School of Science. And the other was the other neighborhood, and there was also some stuff from like my parents' neighborhood. And the other was the one other neighborhood that I would visit where I had old friends, which was the Inwood section of Manhattan. And it was, finally at one point, they showed a street sign. They mostly avoided the street signs, and I got to realize, I'm like, how is this happening? Because they sort of spliced these two neighborhoods together as if they were contiguous, when actually it's like a 45-minute walk. But I used to do that walk all the time. I would walk from my parents' house to this other neighborhood, the part of Manhattan that is closest to the Bronx, the Inwood section. So there was just a very weird trickster aspect at work in my relationship to watching the movie. And this is something that I've also written about in something I wrote. It's also YouTube called The Batman Shooting and Crossover Effects, where movies are huge portals for synchronicity, and some kind of trickster function of the unconscious often seems to govern that, where nobody planned that out. It's not like people made the movie to freak me out, but there was this weird juxtaposition of these two very specific obscure neighborhoods in New York City, which is a pretty big place, being placed together as if they were together when they're not.
Hey, would you call, or would you consider that like an example of, it's a great term that you came up with years ago that I still love. It's called weird patterning.
Right. I think you're thinking of a saying I have that wherever you cast your obsessive attention, there shall you find weird patterning. And so weird patterning, and some of that would be under the rubric synchronicity.
Yes.
Is something that is ever present, especially if you're an obsessive type of person like I am. It's something that people will misinterpret and interpret it as meaning what they want it to mean, and therefore be tricked in, be bad rabbit hole navigators and end up in some kind of a total quagmire because they've underestimated the trickster aspect of the unconscious. That because something is a synchronicity does not mean you're on the right track.
Right.
And it can be very deceptive.
Does it mean that you necessarily aren't, or could it also go the other way?
It could.
Yeah.
It could. And so that's one of the tricky things to navigate. But it also, people will misinterpret it. They'll see weird patterning and assume that human egos, such as a conspiracy, a cabal of human egos, was responsible. So, for example, if you want to find out if you need to replace your car tires, they say take a penny, and if the tread doesn't cover Lincoln's head, that means that you need new tires.
Right.
And because from the outside of the circumference of the penny to the top of Lincoln's head is exactly 1/16 of an inch, and Lincoln was also our 16th president. So now, if you're a conspiratist, then that looks like something that a grand conspiracy the Federal Reserve pointed out. But these things just line up. Things just happen that seem improbable. It doesn't mean that anybody planned them.
Interesting.
Any human ego planned them, because there's a trickster aspect at work in the whole cosmos that creates weird patterning, but we can't assign any logical causal vector to explain it.
Okay, so then back to Donald Trump. Then you mentioned that he could be considered sort of a darker aspect of the trickster archetype, but that also you've spent quite a bit of time thinking about it and writing about it, and that it is sort of a cosmic trickster type of situation. Could you tell me and everyone else what you think the relevance of that is, or have you considered it?
Well, it has many areas of relevance. I mean, one thing that I've been very interested in, especially since 1978 when I started reading Jung and read his volume 10 of his collected works, Civilization and Transition, where he's talking about collective psychosis. And he's especially analyzing, Nazi Germany, and he was an analyst in Nazi Germany. He even shook Hitler's hand at one point, described it as like a psychic scarecrow. He was able to predict what was going to happen in Germany in broad outline, beginning in the Weimar Republic, when his patients were dreaming, his educated German patients were dreaming of Wotan, a Nordic or Germanic god of war and mayhem, called it Wotanism. It was such a striking phenomenon. And so I've been very interested in collective psychosis, and also, coming from the Jewish tribe where I had lots of relatives who had survived the Holocaust and things like that, which was the result, the body count of I'm part of the body count of this giant, almost planetary psychosis. I've always been very wary and worried about signs of collective psychosis. And right now I see them on both the right and the left. And so Trump is can be seen as a trickster, because archetypes often blur with one another. So he has elements of the shadow, like the shadow of inferior masculinity, and certain shadow aspects of the American psyche, and is sort of a trickster-like ability to kind of channel some of those shadowy forces from the American unconscious and turn himself into an unexpectedly, winning of the Electoral College candidate in 2016. And so he he seems to also be helping to generate a great deal of collective psychosis, which we've seen in a lot of wacky conspiracy groups like QAnon. I actually saw a woman on Pearl Street in Boulder promoting QAnon, which is a conspiracy set of conspiracy theories that's so goofy that you would think that any intelligent second grader would laugh at it.
And I'm fascinated by the following and I mean just the penetration into culture. I mean, you see signs, Q or T-shirts and things like that. And to be honest, I know very little about that whole thing. In fact, I decided never to go down that particular rabbit hole. I've had people ask me to do a show on it. They say there are experts, you know what I mean? And perhaps there are. But I don't know. I the whole political thing to me is sort of an energy suck. And I don't want to do a political show. I don't mind talking about it a little bit with you. You and I have talked about it a little bit off the air, that it's just like it's not the best use of time, but I do see what you're saying on both sides. Certainly on the Democrat and or the right and the left. Let's put it that way. That there seems to be just an absolute. I won't use the word insanity, but man, people are losing it on both sides, and really scary, to be honest. I mean, it's just.
And I completely sympathize with your perspective of not wanting to touch it. It's such a high-voltage third rail, and it's actually more dangerous to touch the forbidden, politically incorrect territory of the left, because there really is a truth to the cancel culture thing, and to say one remark that can be misinterpreted as a microaggression against whatever minority group, and you'll be, excommunicated, and somebody called what they do social murder.
Yeah.
And so, I see a lot of hipster types and counterculture people, closer to the type of people that I would be friends with and meet in festivals and so forth. And I'm beginning to realize that a lot of them are like possessed church ladies in drag.
God.
You can sort of see the crosses burning in their eyes, dare to say one thing that is against is forbidden by their ideology.
Right.
And they will shut you down in a second.
Yeah.
It's frightening.
I get scared, just thinking about my own radio show, not really about things that I say, but I don't have control of what other people say.
Right.
And there have been times when I think, oh God, I wonder when someone's going to get a hold of that and try to crucify me for it, But
sure.
Anyway, I try not to sweat it, and I try to just, because I gave up on politics many, many years ago, and as a history sort of person, for me, the position of president as a legitimately powerful figure disappeared for me when Kennedy was killed. And for me, every president since then has been like a hood ornament almost. And it's the same car, and it's going in the same direction, and he ain't driving it, and he just is the front of it, and people get to see that face and get to pick on him or love him or whatever. But there are powerful forces behind the scenes, and have been for quite some time. Some people would argue for millennia, but at any rate, Donald Trump is not in charge of everything that fucking happens in America, or the world for that matter. I mean, there are lots of other powerful people, many of them whose names we don't even probably know. But the idea that this is, just an ego trip between different political players out there that are all shown on CNN and Fox or wherever, talk about amateur historiography, or conspiracy theories. That's what it is.
Well, I don't quite agree with you. I mean, the idea of the president as hood ornament, as just a figurehead.
Really?
Basically. I don't see that. I mean, and if you look at how things have changed between Obama and Trump, it seems like it's the perfect contrary illustration.
Well,
I mean, to see how consequential those two elections were, and what a dramatic difference.
The biggest
in our
difference
lives and
that
how
I
the pandemic
see
is being handled and everything.
Well, the biggest difference I see is social cultural difference in the U.S. But as far as foreign policy, I don't see much difference at all. We're still. The military still is engaged. I mean, Obama didn't get us out of anywhere. We still fought and protected all of our assets around the world as much as we ever did. And Trump hasn't changed any of that. I don't know. I guess I see maybe both sides.
I mean,
of it,
the Iranians blinked, but we almost had another Middle East war. Remember that the Obama administration had created that nuclear deal, whether it was good or bad. I mean, it was.
No, it was in place and everything. Yeah, I agree with that.
Good cases either way. But I mean, then Trump had Soleimani assassinated, and it looked like we were right on the brink of a war with a country that's much more powerful than Iraq ever was. They backed off. And that threat went away, but I mean, there could have been huge consequences there.
Yeah, okay, so, fair enough. Yeah.
And also like what's going on with China now. Not all of that. I mean, China was getting away with a lot, and Trump called them on it. But I mean, but definitely there have been all kinds of moves. I mean, we'd have to start going through the headlines and stuff. But there are all kinds of things that have shifted drastically based on who is president. Our standing in the world has gone way down.
Oh my gosh!
Obama was revered as a leader, as as a paragon of the civilized. His whole demeanor and everything is just a civilized, rational actor and this kind of thing. And I was just listening to a show that just happened to be interviewing a survivor of Hiroshima. And she was talking about, and so she's been an activist against nuclear war, and she was just talking.
I may have heard it.
Just sheer horror. She was on with Christiana Amanpour's show. About late last week maybe, and she was just speaking with this is a woman who's in her 88 or something, and she's just speaking with just such authentic horror about the president that you have in the United States. I mean, she realized how this was just destabilizing the whole world. So, so this is the idea that there are these shadowy forces and that who's president doesn't matter. I don't think really holds up. I think that there are some things that stay the same.
All right, so let me back up on that a little bit then and say that I would still argue that there are powerful forces that are also in play that are not the president. I won't say that the president is not a factor. That's all I'm saying. There are many other things at play. That's all.
Okay, no, I agree with that. And even if you listen to some of the craziest conspiracy theories, or David Icke or somebody, if you take a half metaphorical step back from what they're saying, there may be a certain element of truth. There may be because I mean I believe in stranger things than some conspiracists do. There may be non-physical in the conventional sense, parasitic forces that are manipulating. I mean, this is sort of like what the Gnostics believed.
Yeah, mind parasites.
There could be very strange forces at work, and people then project those onto various human egos. Another way in which it can seem like there's a cabal of unified power, though everything in current events really shows us that there's no one set of puppet masters. There's competing spheres of power.
Right.
But one way in which groups will seem like, wow, are these elite power elites all shape-shifting reptilians, is that a lot of power elites now and in the past were psychopaths. And this is a very distinct subspecies. And so a lot of, because psychopathy has such a particular set of characteristics, psychopaths in one culture will behave in very characteristic ways like psychopaths in another culture, so it can seem as if they're all maybe shape-shifting reptilians. They are kind of more reptilian than mammalian in some ways, in that they're much more driven by power and excitement, and they have proto-emotions and not some of the warmer, fuzzier emotions that we would want them to have.
Very little empathy, very little sympathy, that type of thing, yes.
So it can be a biological kind of conspiracy without there necessarily having to be part of the same organized cabal or something.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Okay, cool. Let's continue. We got about 5 more minutes and we'll take a break, but I want to keep talking about this trickster thing because it's probably happening all over the world in different cultures in ways that we're not aware of. In other words, we're seeing the big ones here, I guess, where we live. Are there any examples in real time that you can think of that where we can see this elsewhere on the planet right now? Certainly we have Mr. Trump to thank for one of the trickster images.
Yeah, I mean, other cases, other countries where there are tricksters at work. Well, how about Vladimir Putin? He was manipulating our election, and he's using, all the tricks of the internet is like a trickster's paradise. There are so many ways in which you can skew perceptions. I mean, if you look at the things that the GRU and these different Russian hacker groups do, where they create phony profiles and they will rev up, both the anti-gun people and the gun people,
right?
Because they just want to create mayhem and chaos. So Putin is acting perfectly like a trickster, but in a very rational way from the point of view of his motivations, in that he just wants to create conflict and destroy us from within. It's almost like that moment in Fellowship of the Ring, where they're all gathering together, and the ring is like on this stone pedestal, and they're about to organize the fellowship, and they all start arguing about who's going to be the ring bearer. And you start hearing the whispers of Mordor in the background that's kind of like egging them on into the state of conflict and, divide and conquer. So the Russians, in a very organized and effective way, are using trickster strategies. They don't have the economic power, and they can't risk, a direct military confrontation. So they're using trickster strategies of deception and so forth. And you find that sometimes in the animal kingdom too.
Yeah.
But definitely the trickster function is very dominant. And also the trickster function is what rules over the paranormal. And my friend George Hansen wrote a seminal book on that called The Trickster and the Paranormal.
I have a question here. Who is George Hansen?
George Hansen is, I forget exactly his background. He sometimes talks about himself as like a social scientist. But he's got a very strong science background. But he really has had some really breakthrough ideas about how the trickster archetype relates to the paranormal. All
right, hey, let's hold that thought, and we'll give people something to think about for a few minutes, and I can take a break, and we'll come back, and you can expand a little bit and tell us about George Hansen, okay?
Sure.
All right, cool. My guest tonight is Jonathan Zap. You can find him on the web at Zap Oracle, ZAPORACLE, zaporacle.com. He also has a real cool YouTube page under the same name. And, we've been talking with John for about a half an hour if you just joined the program. He was with us last week as well. So stick around. We've got a lot more to talk about, and we'll come back with him in a few minutes. All right, John, back in a few, okay?
Okay.
All right, it's Mike, and this is Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia, and we're on the web at kopn.org, streaming every Monday night from 11 o'clock until 1:30 or 2, depending on what's going on. We're going to play one here from our featured musicians of the evening. They are called Skinshape, and this one is called Sun.
When you're shy on my mind, I miss you and your good vibes. He's a lover person. Oh yeah. There's no way you'll be mine. Oh. Yes, it's time to surrender. She's not a pretender. He knows. Sunny day, don't go away. I need you in my life for the good times. When you're shy on my mind, I miss you and your good vibes.
Alrighty, this program is supported in part by Pizza Tree Pizza. Pizza Tree offers pizza by the slice, specialty pies, and delivery. Pizza Tree is located at 909 Cherry Street and open 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day except Monday. And more information available at pizzatreepizza.com or on Facebook. And they have great pizza. And I appreciate them underwriting the program. This program is also supported in part by Sycamore Restaurant, serving new American fare made from scratch with local products. Sycamore is now open for curbside and takeout service Monday through Saturday. I think they have limited seating, too. 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the corner of 8th and Broadway in downtown Columbia. Check that out and give them a call if you got a question about seating. Right, let's get back to the program. It's Mike and Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. My guest is Jonathan Zap. He was with us last week. He's with us again. We're talking about skills necessary for rabbit hole navigation. That's another way of saying how to get through life successfully and learn a few things and enjoy a few things and maybe teach a few things. I don't know, but it's very valuable to discuss and to learn some of the skills that John has been talking with us about for a couple weeks now. So anyway, back to you, John. Hi.
What's going on?
Hey, I'm just enjoying myself and our conversation as usual.
Okay.
All right, back
you
to...
definitely got me thinking about the trickster archetype.
Yeah.
I think we're in a very trickster zone historically right now.
It feels like it, and I want to talk a little bit more about it because I've got a couple other questions here in regard to it. But let's first... please have you finish your thoughts about Mr. George Hansen and who he was and who he was to you.
Well, he's still around.
Great. Okay. So many of our mentors are gone. I guess I always assume now.
Right. Well, thankfully he's still with us.
Yes.
Well, his book, The Trickster and the Paranormal, everyone should read, and he really puts the whole paranormal phenomenon and how different people and how different cultures react to it into a very brilliant and incisive perspective. And basically, what he points out, and this is something that people often underestimate about the paranormal, is the trickster aspect of it. It's just like with ufology, there's no consistent theory that you can have that explains the whole phenomenon.
Right.
There are so many bizarre parts of it that will not fit into any consistent theory.
Yes.
And other aspects of the paranormal are famously non-reproducible on demand.
Yeah.
They violate expected hierarchies, so that somebody of low social status may turn out to have a great deal of paranormal ability. and somebody of high social status may not. So, for example, the peasant monk Rasputin, had tremendous paranormal charisma and things like that, and he was able to manipulate and may have led to the downfall of the Russian the Tsar and the Tsar's family and the Russian royal family. And so it violates all kinds of expected norms. It's very anti-structural, and therefore the more complex, the more structured a social organization is, the more anti-paranormal it will be. So the social organization that's most friendly to the paranormal, that even institutionalizes it with shamans, is a hunter-gatherer tribe,
yes.
which is a very loosely organized, the most loosely structured, social unit we can think of, pretty much, and that's a complete, society.
Right.
But when we get to something, say, like the Catholic Church, it's extremely hierarchical and organized, with a whole, set of different, from bishops to the Pope and so forth, and even though it's based on a religion that is just chock full of the paranormal, with Jonah and the whale and talking snakes, and it's just one, rising from the dead, and
burning
so
bushes,
but yet, because it's such a structured and complex society, it is profoundly anti-paranormal. So, for example, George Hansen in his book quotes a 1991 Catholic catechism that says, use of consulting spirits, use of oracles, it lists all these different things, and it said even if it were for the purpose of restoring human health, is profoundly anti-religious and disrespectful of God and this kind of thing. And, really? I mean, the Bible is full of all these things.
And that's what
they don't want any new such things, you say.
And what about prayer? I mean, isn't that exactly what you're trying to invoke, is some sort of supernatural event by contacting angels or God or whoever it is?
I mean, it has to work through some sort of paranormal means, and I remember, but I had a similar reaction, even though it was far less rigid and less patriarchal, to the very liberal Reform Judaism that I was brought up in, where I remember in Sunday school, they said, the age of miracles is over. And that immediately struck me as like a profound and cosmic lie.
Yeah.
Like, where does it say in the Bible that there's an expiration date on miracles?
Right.
Because I had already had paranormal experiences. But what I immediately felt was, this was these liberal, humanist, rationalist, wonderful people, but they wanted to keep all that paranormal stuff safely contained in the past. We can't have new miracles and new prophets and so forth, but that is anti-religion in a sense, because the Judaism had this history of these prophets who were very iconoclastic and would and some would say maybe Jesus was one of the prophets. They'd be turning over the money lenders' tables, and this kind of thing. They would be breaking the norms and denouncing the king and a Jewish king or whatever. And so, but now we want that's the trickster element right there. It's anti-hierarchical. It's disruptive, and it can just suddenly erupt. And so a very organized society doesn't want that, because that's mutagenic. And this goes back to a basic biological idea that organisms are conservative. Both Freud and Jung noticed that the human psyche was conservative, but really I think all organisms are. They seek out that homeostasis, a dialed-in equilibrium, and just like your immune system is going to attack anything that it thinks is a stranger or that's different, doesn't match up with its filters or whatever, it's going to have an immunological response. So, a trickster is a mutagen. The paranormal is mutagenic, mutants and so forth. And so a patriarchal society will attack that, and that's why science will do it as well. And science will even do it in many ways similar to the way the Catholic Church does. Like, for example, when Cambridge biologist Rupert Sheldrake came out with his book, A New Science of Life,
I remember.
The editor of the prestigious science journal Nature said that the book should be burned. And he said that it should be burned for the same reasons that the bishops, denounced Galileo. It was just like unbelievable. Like, why would a scientist compare himself to like the Catholic Church? But it was a very apt comparison because they're both patriarchal outfits that don't want this anti-structural mutagen that's going to, be as like Terence McKenna called it, the cosmic giggle at the bachelor party of science. Where all these things that were expected to work a certain way, and certain things are expected not to happen, and so forth. All these sort of expected things, or for example, that paranormal is full of observer effects. Well, if observer effects get out of control, then it throws off the validity of all kinds of scientific results, even if you have double-blind methodology. And so science is profoundly anti-paranormal in an irrational way. And there was even somebody that George Hansen quotes, a social scientist, I believe, who did a study that showed that the degree of prestige that a scientist had, how how much of a degree they had, and what sort of appointment they had, and how prestigious that was, that correlated perfectly with how anti-paranormal they would be.
And even to the point where they reject pretty much anything except the currently accepted, whatever the current paradigm is. They're very difficult on new theories that perhaps aren't even paranormal or supernatural or anything like that. They just don't like change to begin with in many cases. And
right, we can see this in other areas of science too, where there's a rigidification. And it starts to become, and then of course our mutual friend John Major Jenkins went through that with the academic Mayanists.
Yes.
Probably ruined his health.
Oh my God!
But they have an irrational prejudice, so that, for example, there's a woman who's the president of I forget the name of it, but it's the American Society of Statisticians, and she said, really, from a point of view of rigorous statistics, the evidence of the paranormal is as overwhelmingly conclusive as the evidence we have for almost anything. But it's not accepted based on an irrational, unscientific prejudice. So we have scientism, that is a sort of like a religious belief system.
Yes, absolutely.
Like organized Catholicism.
Yeah. Well, and this takes us back to true skepticism and how important that is, because what you're talking about there is not true skepticism. It's the false skepticism.
Right. It's debunkerism. It's a belief in a negative, and without doing your homework, without doing the research. So paranormal evidence is dismissed as unscientific. But when Rupert Sheldrake did a meta-analysis of like all scientific studies versus paranormal studies, the percentage that involved human subjects, paranormal studies that use double-blind methodology, the gold standard to remove some subjective effects, was like 87%. Used at least double-blind methodology. But for all scientific experiments, regular mainstream ones that involve human subjects, it was maybe only 23%.
Wow.
So it's an irrational prejudice, but it has to do with that fear of the trickster element, because there's a desire in a complex society to have things under control, even though the trickster element has pretty much invaded physics. So that there was that famous speech in the late 19th century where some head of a physics society in England or something said that the project of physics was basically over. It was just a matter of adding additional decimal points.
Yeah.
And now physics is completely ruled. It has really just become the paranormal. It's everything that's been discovered is so crazy sounding, like Terence McKenna called it, the limit test of credulity, the Big Bang hypothesis, the idea that the universe sprang into being in one moment for no reason from a point, 10 orders of magnitude smaller than a gnat's toenail. And, he called that the limit test of credulity and so forth. And we have string theory that can't even conceive of any experiment to confirm or disconfirm it.
Right.
So physics has sort of become and ever more bizarre, far more bizarre than almost any paranormal scenario we can think of.
Well, yeah, and I think that the double slit experiment and then quantum everything really threw such a wrench into the models that now it's just been a crazy, wild race to come up with something that makes some sort of sense to somebody, but there's very little consensus really at this point,
It doesn't seem to be happening. The unified field theory, it doesn't seem to, it's as if the universe cannot be fully rationalized. And it's just like this physicist, I like him quite a lot as a popularizer of science, Michio Kaku, and he talks, I call it Kaku's angry inch. He feels that we will eventually have an equation 1 inch long that will explain everything. Well, I think he's very likely to be disappointed, and so far he is disappointed. I don't think that's going. I don't think the universe is quite that easily cut and dried and easy to rationalize. And that's sort of like where quantum mechanics seems to be taking us is into ever deeper into irreducible weirdness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Have you ever been in touch with George Hansen? Are you guys friendly or?
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's been to my house a couple of times, and I've spoken to him at length.
Interesting. Does he have any current comments? I mean, are you familiar with what does he have any comments on the current state of affairs in the world?
We have talked about it, but I've agreed to keep those confidential.
I understand. Maybe I'll have to see if I can get him to come on the program.
Yeah, I think he'd be a fantastic guest.
Wow, cool. All right, before we continue, I did have science as religion as one of my bullet points here, but I think we covered that pretty well. I would like to talk, though, about contradiction. Next to the trickster notes here, I have the word contradiction. And I'd like you to talk about contradiction and how that might play in with the trickster archetype. And certainly it's something that I'm seeing now in just modern life. Everywhere I go, including science, I feel that for every story that I read, I can find a contradictory story, and both of them seem at least reasonable. It's very hard to draw a conclusion, and it seems to me that there's contradiction everywhere right now. Could you maybe comment on that?
Sure. Well, you may have at some point read my philosophy, or it's also a YouTube if people want to listen to it, called Dynamic Paradoxicalism, the anti-ism-ism. And so basically the idea of dynamic paradoxicalism is it relates to something that Niels Bohr, the father of quantum mechanics, once said: the opposite of a profound truth is another profound truth. And so my idea, and this is one of my tools of rabbit hole navigation, dynamic paradoxicalism, is that is to recognize that all the important truths are part of a certain type of paradox. I think it's called a dialetheism or something, where there's these sort of two different poles, and that you become a fool if you are an absolutist and you identify with only one of the poles and don't recognize that the opposite pole is often true.
Yes.
Or applies better in some circumstances. So for an example of this is the New Age fundamentalism, you create your own reality, which seems to have begun with some things that Seth said to Jane Roberts, and then other channeled entities started to pick this up and so forth. And you will hear various New Age people pull this out of the hat like the most tired of magicians' rabbits, and without noticing that it completely fails even the most simple reality tests.
Yeah, if you can
did I create
your own reality,
English?
please do it.
I'm pretty sure English existed before I was born, and yet it controls my sense of subject and object and gender and time and all that kind of stuff. So the opposite principle of you create your own reality is outside reality creates you. That would be the perspective of, environmental determinism, like a book like, Guns, Germs, and Steel or something like that, or, that kind of thing. But then that point of view, of the completely determinist point of view, is also a foolish absolutism, because sometimes you do create your own reality. You create your own reality as a very powerful reality formation vector. So if you're a dynamic paradoxicalist, you have a sliding or dynamic relationship between these contradictions or opposing, poles of the paradox. So, for example, if I'm going to a party in Boulder where there's going to be 15 people, pre-pandemic, of course,
Yes.
And I think that they're going to like me, or I think that they're not going to like me, I probably will create my own reality, because that size group is of a small enough scale that, like, my opinion of myself is probably going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, if I'm a Jew in Warsaw, Poland, and the Nazis are coming to town, well, you create your own reality would say, just focus on how well you'll be treated by the Nazis. But in that situation, outside reality has got a lot more people, a lot more temporal momentum. These people have a rigid ideology, and that are probably not going to accept me very well as a Jew. I should just get out of Dodge, or in this case, Warsaw, and realize that outside reality, just like, if I was a citizen of Pompeii in 700 AD or whatever, when the volcano goes off, I've got to recognize that, a shift in my attitude is not going to save me from the shock wave of, the volcanic eruption and that kind of thing.
Right.
So you have to know which one, which principle applies in which circumstance. There's a lot of circumstances in which I absolutely do create my own reality, and that's by far that, when I'm having my morning writing sessions and so forth, when I'm, driving on the freeway, I have to recognize that there are outside factors that are not necessarily in my control that I better take into account.
Yeah. All right. I like it, and I think that is maybe the most important thing that we've touched on tonight: dynamic paradoxicalism and the relationship to contradiction, and how to manage that, because it is front and center right now, I feel like, John.
Right, because we have so many people right now who are absolutist, and they're counterfactual, and they're just like, I'm on the blue team, or I'm on the red team, and they are unable to entertain an opposite point of view. And for me, it's also like a profound cultural horror, because I was sort of brought up in, my grandfather grew up in a village in Latvia that had no electricity, but he was a Talmudic prodigy. This is this book of Jewish, where rabbis across the centuries debate each other.
Yeah.
And this is very big in the Jewish tradition, is, you can debate God. God can take it, the rabbis would say. And so anything can be questioned. So I grew up with very scientifically minded intellectual parents, and where normal conversation was aggressive Socratic dialogue, which really helped to sharpen my thinking. And then I was on the Bronx High School of Science debate team, the #1 debate team in the country. And if you're on with high school debate, you find out like 5 minutes before the debate whether you're arguing for or against the proposition, which teaches you to have a very versatile mind, because you realize you can argue, you can use reason and rhetorical skills as a weapon just as well for or against something. Just as a lawyer will learn that, of course. But a lot of people who live on social media don't realize that at all.
Yes.
They can only think one way, and if you can call what they do thinking at all, it's just like, I'm one of the woke people. Everything that I and my friends believe is right, and by definition, if you disagree with us,
you're canceled.
You should be deplatformed. You're wrong.
You're canceled.
You're a racist. You're this, that, or the other thing. And they have absolutely no ability to. So you would think that liberal used to mean being in favor of free speech, but no, they cannot bear to have anybody contradict them. So that's why I say I see on the left a lot of like crazed church ladies in drag. They may have dreadlocks and whatever kind of covered with tattoos or something, but they're as absolutely rigid as a Baptist minister's wife or something from 1910 or something like that.
Well, and one of their primary platforms is acceptance and tolerance.
Except that they're the most intolerant.
You know,
group.
but it's like acceptance and tolerance unless you're different than us. Then you're not accepted
Right,
and tolerated.
exactly. I mean, you know, as possessed as, I mean, because when I would post these Trump articles, I have some Facebook friends, almost all of whom are former students of mine from the 80s that I taught, or the early 90s that I taught in Long Island, New York, which is a big Trump enclave. And so these former students who are still friends of mine, now they're in their 40s or something, they were formerly high school students, will attack my, you know, they really believe in Trump and they'll attack my, but at least they do it with a certain sense of humor.
Right.
Maybe a very nasty sense of humor, but they're not but we're also able to like kind of laugh at the same joke together, and like, you know, but there's kind of a dissing culture, so we can sort of like laugh at each other's insults and that kind of thing.
Right, they're more open
and that was always
about
true in New York. You know, we would tell ethnic jokes and, you know, on each other and that kind of thing, and nobody like got excommunicated and deplatformed.
Yeah.
But the people on the left, oh my God, I mean, they can't tolerate, you know, a divergent point of view at all. You have to be, you know, to even think of something that's different than what they think means you have to be permanently put away.
Yeah, and this is what I don't understand about tolerance and acceptance.
They're completely intolerant.
Yeah, it's unreal. And this is the contradiction, and the right is not much better. They're just more, they got their own problems, but they're more open about who they don't like. They just say it straight away. You know, so.
It's a little bit more refreshingly like straight up and in your face.
Yeah.
And, you know, to some extent. And, you know, I'm a Jew from the Bronx. You know, I was used to this kind of like in your face, you know, but but people would tell you exactly what they thought.
Yeah.
But you would stand up to that. And, you know, my best friend when I was growing up, he and his brother, they were Ukrainians who lived next door. They were literally card-carrying members of an American Nazi party when I met them. But, you know, I would convince them of my point of view sometimes, or, you know, they would try and convince me of theirs and so forth. I mean, we were able to tolerate people that were completely different in their point of view without completely freaking out and having to, like, you know, burn them at the stake and this kind of thing.
Right. Very interesting. All right. Well, John, I think that's a good place for us to take another break, okay?
Sure.
All right. We are speaking with Jonathan Zap, and we have been speaking about rabbit hole navigation and tools and skills to help you in such navigation. We've been doing it for most of the show tonight. We did it all last week, and we're going to continue for another hour or so here. Jonathan, before we go, I'm going to give a little teaser and ask you to think a little bit about your new book, Parallel Journeys, and if you'd like to talk a little bit about that at some point during the program. I know you've been working on it essentially your entire adult life, and I'm just curious to get an update, and maybe it'll be released sometime, maybe it won't. But at any rate, Jonathan Zap on the line with us, and you can find him at Zap Oracle, ZAPORACLE, zaporacle.com. Wonderful YouTube site as well, under the same name, Zap Oracle. You can link up with John and his websites through mine at mikehagan.com. Consider the podcast, and you can get all these programs come to you just like magic, all right? Okay, Jonathan, back in a few minutes. Thank you for sticking around.
Great.
Okay, it's Mike, once again, Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia. We're going to play one from Skinshape here. This one is one of my favorites. John, we'll have about 4.5 minutes, a good long break here. This one is called Kuru. Be back in a few minutes with Jonathan Zap. All right, it's another one from Skinshape. I like these guys. There's really one guy, as a matter of fact. I'm sure he's helped out, but Skinshape is the project of a British musician. His name is William Dorey, and aside from the Skinshape project, he was the bassist for Palace. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there was a band called Palace, a European band, 2014 to around 2018 or so, and he toured playing guitar for the Monophonics for a little bit. And he also runs a reggae label called Horus Records, interestingly enough. And they reissue rare releases from the 60s, 70s, and 80s Jamaican-style reggae. You can kind of hear that in that last song that we just heard. Anyway, cool stuff from William Dorey, a.k.a. Skinshape. All right, it's Mike, and you're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. We'll hear more from those guys throughout the program. We got another hour and a half or so. About an hour and 10 minutes. Anyway, my guest is Mr. Jonathan Zap. Thrilled to have him with us again this week, and we're going to get right back to it. Hi, John.
Hey.
All right, on the web, once again, zaporacle.com, and you can link there from my site. Okay, John, we mentioned the term a couple of times in the last segment, but I want to spend a little bit more time on reality testing. Let's talk about that, what it means, and how to actually kind of do it.
Well, I do have another YouTube and essay called "Reality Testing is Politically Incorrect," and so it's a vast subject. But I mean, some of it just involves a lot of the English teacher stuff that I taught in high school about checking the sources of your information, and you hear some kind of crazy political rumor, go on PolitiFact or Snopes or something like that and check it out. Consider the contrary position. See if you can be a dynamic paradoxicalist and argue for the opposite position. Be wary of confirmation bias and reaching premature conclusions. I mean, the whole thing is really about these skills of reality testing. Something else I wrote, Carnival 2012, a psychological study of the 2012 phenomenon, and the 22 pitfalls and blind spots of esoteric research. That's all about reality testing and how bad so many people who go into esoteric studies are at it, because they get possessed by archetypes, or they, possessed by the contents of the collective unconscious, and have them go on a messiah trip, where they become completely deluded
and immune to the rules of evidence and things like that. So.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely.
Well, what are some skills to hold on to that? I mean, are there exercises that people can do to? I guess you just said some of the things that we can do. Check your sources, double check them, and try to take the opposite position and see if you can.
Well, here's a good one, because we tend to have very low quality arguments with people. I mean, this is I've had this experience recently on Facebook, where you have people that are just stubbornly self-righteous and incapable of critical thinking, and that can attack you. But if you have a conflict between somewhat responsible parties, one way that you can mediate that is that before, if you and I are having an argument, let's say, before I can try and rebut your argument, I first have to restate your position and what you just said to your satisfaction, to make sure that I really understood it and can put it into other words. So if you can at least respect an opposing point of view enough to be able to intelligently and concisely restate it, that already sets you up for better reality testing than if you're not even listening to the other person, but are just ready to fire off your talking points based on your ideology, and without any attentiveness to whatever points the other person might have made.
Well, I think that we can show a good example that just happened about an hour ago. We had a little bit of a disagreement about the power position of the president. And it didn't take more than 5-10 minutes or so before we essentially came to an agreement, or at least some sort of conclusion where we understood one another. And
right. I mean, and you notice I'm not politically correct in that, I'm on somebody else's radio show. This is how I get in trouble with people. I freely contradict people. That's just the way I was brought up, and that's just the way I am. If I don't agree with you, I will debate you. And I gave reasons for my position, and and that kind of thing. But because you're an intellectual too, and are not simply going to have an emotional reaction and denounce me for having a contrary point of view, we were able to have a concise debate about it.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, so important stuff: reality testing and critical thinking, rules of evidence, self-inspection perhaps is on that list?
Absolutely. I came up with my one-sentence version of the Jewish religion, and it was to carry the torch of consciousness forward and engage rigorous self-examination for the purpose of advancing ethical conduct.
Would you repeat that again?
It's to carry the torch of consciousness forward and engage in rigorous self-examination for the purpose of ethical conduct.
Wow, I think that's a great motto.
I don't know
to
how
have.
that came up, but I just decided to, like, I'm not going to follow any of the traditions. This is what I think is the inner spirit of it. And I was in Israel, actually, about 3 years ago, and they were selling these beautiful mezuzahs. I don't know if you know what that is, but
No,
it's
what
something
is
where
it?
you put this little... Well, in Orthodox Jewish homes, this would be on every door, but in more common Jewish homes, it would be, just on the front door. It's sort of like a decorative metal object,
Okay.
maybe like between 3 and 4 or 5 inches long or something, and that would have a Torah scroll in it. And the Torah scroll is supposed to be done with hand calligraphy, and it'd be like the Ten Commandments or something. I don't even know what exactly part of the Torah is in it.
Uh-huh.
But and an Orthodox Jew would actually supposed to kiss the mezuzah as he passes from room to room in his house.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, I kind of like these objects, but and when I went to buy one of them, and eventually I got enough to put them on the door frames of every room in my house. But I was told at the store, the price was 10 shekels or whatever it is, but it was triple the price to get the scroll, because the scroll had to be done by hand. I'm like, well, I don't need the scrolls. I don't follow, I don't follow either book of the Bible. So I, as a chaos magician, I decided to modify this traditional object, and so in all those mezuzahs, I have my one-sentence version of the Jewish religion in them, which I just recited for you.
I love it. I think it's fantastic. All right, let's talk about moral grounding.
Okay.
And I guess...
And you also asked me to think about parallel journeys on the break.
Yes. You're welcome to talk about that at any time, including now, if you'd like.
Okay, well, I mean, it's sort of like asking me to think about it is like asking a seismologist to think about earthquakes. It's been like my obsession from, This began in 1978 when I was 20 years old and I made my discoveries about the singularity archetype. And then when I finished my philosophy honors paper called Archetypes of a New Evolution, still on my website, I had this global intuition. And I'd sort of reached my peak as a thinking type probably at 20 years old. And I had this massive global intuition that I would better understand the subject and be better able to communicate it to the world by writing a fantasy novel that explored some of it. Mm-hmm. And what was also going on was a massive restructuring of my whole consciousness. It really felt like somehow I had really developed my thinking function in an earlier lifetime, and that this was a lifetime to be much more bihemispheric and to go down rabbit holes and to not be limited by having to be a fully rational intellect, but also being able to be a fully rational intellect where appropriate. So the earliest versions that have characters, that really start in the same characters as a present version, begin in the early 80s. And there's an official record of it. I went to the NYU graduate creative writing program, and so one of those versions is called Spiral. It was a novella I wrote, signed by my advisor, the famous novelist E.L. Doctorow.
Cool.
He's no longer with us, but he was another Jew from the Bronx who went to Bronx Science, so he was quite a mentor to me. And it's played a very trickster-like role because it forever eludes my grasp. I've written so many different versions of it, and each time it comes to some kind of stopping point where I realize, I'll have a new recognition and have to start over. And there'll be long periods of time where it's simply not available, or where it'll play a kind of trickster role. Like, for example, in 1996, I was trying to write Parallel Journeys, and in the middle of a writing session, I suddenly had this powerful intuition, the muse just demanded that I make a giant collage with images related to Parallel Journeys. And I kept trying to fight the voice off. I'm like, that's the most classic sidetrack. I thought the idea of making a collage was insulting even to my sense of self-importance as a future writer.
Right.
That's like if the muse were telling me to do fingerprint painting or something. But it was so insistent, eventually I had to leave my house, go out in a snowstorm, and and then I started cutting up pages, irreplaceable photographs and pages from books and so forth. And it started a 2-year a multi-year period of doing a lot of collages and decoupage.
Wow.
And part of the purpose was I needed to become more bihemispheric. And in order for my fiction writing to grow, I had to be less of a thinking type. And this was like the one tactile art form and visual art form that I could do without any, drawing ability or anything like that. And I did become very good at it, and so sometimes done it since then. And so also, like in December 3rd of 2017, there was a huge break in I think maybe we talked about it last time or something, where I had to stop writing it, and that's when I got sucked into the rabbit hole writing sessions and so forth. So it's been this battle between, it sort of has led me through all the different rabbit holes, and sometimes those rabbit holes are writing the book itself, which I really want to get done before I drop dead of COVID or something like that. I'm 62 years old. I've been working on what I called it a sudden death copy, where I wanted a copy that, like, okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to have at least, whether it's got flaws or not, it's like at least got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and here it is, And so I'm about 85% through. And I wrote a complete version in 2013 that was gigantic. This one is about 85% done. It's 200,000 words. But wow. I'm determined to complete that last 15% in the next couple months or something. And I'm working with my editor, Austin Iredale, and so forth. But it's all kinds of paranormal experiences. It's inseparable from my life and from, all kinds of crossover paranormal experiences that connect me to it. And I think I probably, maybe even in that earlier show that we did at the end of last year, talked about, an example of one of those. So I want to be careful not to. I don't have a complete memory of everything we talked about, but I want to tell the same anecdote again. But so that's been definitely the longest rabbit hole, you could say, of my life that I've continuously worked on.
For me, and I'm not a writer, but I see it as an art form. And I think about painting and how, and I have many artist friends in lots of different fields of art. Some are painters, some are sculptors, some are musicians, some are writers. But I think writing a book would be hard because it seems it's so easy to keep going. For me, it would seem like, God, it's so hard to put the pen down almost. In a way, visual art, painting is sort of similar to me, is the way it seems. It seems like you can always add another stroke, or you could do a little something else. And I know a lot of artists that struggle with that. They have a hard time putting their name on the bottom of it, and literally saying, this is it, it's done, and now I don't have to, it's done. I'm not going to touch that one again. I'm going to start something else or work on something else. For me, the closest thing that I do to art is this radio show, and it's time bound. So I know that it ends it only goes for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is every week, and then it's over. So I can't help but sign it at the end of it. I just sign off. You know what I mean? And I like the fact that it's it's conclusive like that. Are you seeing that? I guess you must have some feeling of that.
It's a classic dynamic paradox that between structure and anti-structure, between the eternal youth, the pura aeternus archetype that wants unlimited horizons and wants to be able to don't grow up, grow forever. And so parallel journeys is like my child, and I don't want to I don't want it to be finished and then it's sort of sent out into the world and it's gone off to college and I can't change anything and and that kind of thing. I fear some empty nest syndrome or something when it's done. Yeah. But on the other hand, a creative person, you can be much more creative if you are disciplined and if you follow certain structures. Like my day always begins, except in rare road trips or something, but even most of those, I travel around in a Sprinter van, a camper, and it's set up in the back to be a writing lab. So almost every day begins with a writing session, and that allows me to be more creative. because I have that structure. I don't have to be like, I'll get around to it sometime. Every day I'm going to be doing some form of writing, and it's fun. But at the same time, I could keep, the rabbit holes going indefinitely, and so I have to have for it to be dynamic paradoxicalism, I have to include the other principle, and I have to also be a finisher. And I have managed to finish all kinds of other writings, and so this time I'm determined that I will finish, and that I will. I've even told my editor and stuff, of a certain text conservation mode. Give me all the line editing, meticulous line editing you can, but I don't want to hear about like how I could tell the story from a completely different point of view or something like that, because I'll just just never get done.
Right.
And so it's sort of like whatever quirky flaws it might have, I'm determined to finish it. And then if I want to do another edition in the future, or I want to write sequels, I can. Yeah. But I want to really get it done. And I'm not going to be able to. I want to live a long, healthy life. But I'm also very excited for the interdimensional portal of death. I don't want to live 1 minute more than I'm supposed to. But I definitely want to get this done first. And then I'll be much more relaxed about, mortality.
Okay. Well, I really look forward to it. I've been waiting for it for a long time, and I imagine that when it finally comes out, it'll be worth the wait. So,
and if there are any beta testers out there who are good readers who want to look at an advanced copy, I've also made even an audio version of it. They can send me an email, Jonathan Zap @hotmail.com, and ask to be a beta tester.
Well, I may send you that email.
Okay.
And anybody else who'd like to as well. That's a great opportunity, in my opinion. So, all right. Let's give out your contact information real quick, since we just said that. We know you're on the web at zaporacle.com. Can people send you a note right from there?
There might be a contact form on there, but my email is just my name at hotmail.com, so that's pretty easy to remember.
All right. Jonathan Zap @hotmail.com.
Right.
Very good. Okay, back to moral grounding, or let's start a little bit of a conversation about moral grounding. What's it mean, first of all, John?
Well, it means that, and Jung also pointed this out, that if you're going to enter the unconscious, if you're going to enter rabbit holes without a moral stance, you're probably going to get eaten alive. So it's just like people who are taking powerful, heroic doses of psychedelics, but they have no purpose in mind. It's not that you can completely control such a trip, but at least if you have an idea, I'm doing this, I'm going to do it in a serious way because I want to expand my mind or something, and I want to increase my consciousness. But a lot of people are just doing it as kind of a thrill ride, and that's a recipe for disaster. And so what we're seeing, I was just talking to my friend Michelle yesterday, who's like a health guru, and, she had some woman work for her who was, some of her Burning Man friends, and this woman, some kind of famous VJ apparently, was working as her assistant, and she's like a health guru. She has malpractice insurance. She has to keep herself very carefully quarantined so that she's not spreading illness to any patients and this kind of thing. And they had an agreement that, this helper was going to do that too, except she decided to do 3 big shows, like super spreader type shows, without telling anybody, including the person that she was living with, as well as my friend.
Oh.
So, that's criminally unethical. And so you can, you have a lot of people who sort of think that because they're like hipsters and they're avant-garde and they're, go to Burning Man or something, that classic rules of ethics don't apply.
Yeah.
They have some other way of talking their way out of it and psychologizing it of well, I just felt really like my creativity was repressed and I had to express myself. No, you were just being completely unethical. Yeah. You were putting other people's lives at risk. You broke a contract. You broke a sacred agreement with somebody. That's just not cool. And so we have a lot of people, and including the woke generation, who, and these are some of the people that I've been, the psychosis on the left, who feel free to completely act like inquisitors and burn up somebody's life based on rumors or based on one comment that they misinterpret or something like that. these just violate pretty classic universal ethics. And this is also something that you find on the left is a lot of people were trained in college in moral relativism.
Yeah.
I would run into this when I worked for a nonprofit called the Women's Assistance Funds that were helping Islamic women who had been the victims of stove burnings and horrible, acts of violence, and they'd be like, well, that's just their culture. And I'm like, I don't care if it's their culture. If you want to burn people's faces off, I don't care. I don't think they're comforted knowing they had a culturally authentic experience.
Right.
I don't care if it's your culture.
Yeah,
that's wrong. I judge that as, another thing those people say, don't be judgmental, which of course is a judgment.
Right.
But I feel free to be a judge. Of course you should be judgmental. You have to be. What is your life but a whole series of different judgments?
Yes, you can't.
The only thing that's wrong is to make stupid judgments.
Yeah.
But you've got to judge things, and you've got to judge them morally, because I will allow myself to go on any weird rabbit hole, but not if it's going to be an ethical compromise. I'm not going to I let the world and the imagination in my life blur where it's safe to do so. I wouldn't do so if I was on the jury of a murder trial or something. If you're not going to be ethical, you heard my one-sentence religion, then you shouldn't even leave the house, let alone go into a rabbit hole.
I agree with you. Absolutely. All right. I think that's short and sweet, and it makes very good sense. All right, next thing on my list. Actually, it wasn't on my list, but I wrote it down since you've mentioned it a couple times. We've talked about chaos magic. We really never talked about it, but we've mentioned it a few times. I'd like you to mention just a little bit about that. What is chaos magic? You call yourself a chaos magician sometimes, and maybe a little bit about randomness and the difference between the two. Okay,
well, so I was a chaos magician before I ever heard the term, and I've read almost nothing about it. But it's just it's pretty much what I was doing already. And it's basically just that instead of trying to do, and let's get a definition. Magic, according to Aleister Crowley, is the science and art of creating change in conformity to will. For every intentional act is a magical act. So some people think that, magic means, Harry Potter or something. But it could mean things like you might read in Harry Potter, though I don't particularly care for those books.
Yeah.
But basically a chaos magician is doing magical rituals or various magical acts without regard to any tradition. Unlike, say, an Aleister Crowley, who is, has a part of a certain magical order and is, doing classic spells of invocation or whatever. So, and there are some very prominent fantasy writers who are chaos magicians, Grant Morrison and Alan Moore. And so I feel a lot in common with their work and with them. And they also have experienced their work, like Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, this huge graphic novel, as like a portal of synchronicities and crossover effects and so forth. That's what like Parallel Journeys is for me. And so chaos magic, you just sort of free yourself up from any kind of false authority, like the idea that because, this is from ancient Egypt or it's a Native American, these people had brains no bigger than yours or mine, and why do I need to defer to a tradition when something that is spontaneously created in the moment seems like it would be more magical, would have more conscious intention than if I am merely repeating by rote something that I inherited from my religion or some magical tradition, right?
Yes.
And so I just do, and I've always just do different rituals or create talismans and things like that, create mythologies, and remarkable things happen. Like one example that I use in the Rabbit Hole videos, I was attracted to a signet ring that I bought at an antique store in Boulder, and it had an inscription in it, Ulrich 6/67, June 1967, Ulrich. Well, that was too specific for me to leave that alone. I had to mythologize that in order to make this ring into a talisman. So I created a character, Hans Ulrich, who lived in 1667 and 1967. There are like two occurrences of him 300 years apart. He's a time traveler or something, and I don't even remember the whole mythology, but I built this thing up.
Right.
And then, like 2 days after I did that, I get a unexpected email from my webmaster, Tanner Derry. Usually doesn't send me emails unless it's directly about, the website or something. And it is a link to a historian, an article by a German historian named Hans Ulrich, the same exact name, who has a theory of history that there's 300 years missing from Western history because of a flaw in the Gregorian calendar. So we have the same exact name, and notice there was, in my mythology, there was a 300-year gap between 1667 and 1967,
right.
And here's somebody with, so, that's an example of how I wasn't expecting this mythology to create a crossover effect. It was just spontaneous, imaginal chaos magic, but it produced, or I shouldn't even use the word produce, because then that implies causality, and you can think of it synchronistically or however you want to think about it.
Okay.
But there's some kind of a bleed through there, where then this thing that I did as a private ritual, telling no one, somehow it syncs up with events happening, through another agent, Tanner Derry, the webmaster. So I do these things all the time, and they're a profound influence in my life, and they relate to parallel journeys and to other things.
Very interesting. All right, well, I think we should take a break. We're a little bit past my time here, so let's do that. Let's take a break. We'll play a short one, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about rabbit hole navigation. I have a note here about alternative selves as rabbit holes, and I also want to talk about spiritual allies and entities, and I think those things kind of go together, perhaps. So let's come back and talk about spiritual allies and alternative selves a little bit. We've covered that in depth. We did a whole show on it, but I think it relates again. So we'll do that in a minute. Okay, John?
Sure.
All right, everybody. It's Mike. You're listening to Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. Jonathan Zap on the line with me this evening. You can find information about him on the web at Zap Oracle, ZAPORACLE, zaporacle.com. Send him an email if you want to check out Parallel Journeys, the new old book that Jonathan has been working on for many, many moons. And I look forward to the day that it comes out. And if you'd like to check it out beforehand and become perhaps a beta reader and give some thoughts about it, you can get a hold of John at Jonathan Zap at hotmail.com, John?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jonathan Zap at hotmail.com. And I'll probably put a link up on my website for that as well. You can get to him from there right now anyhow. And we'll come back with him in just a few minutes. All right, here's one from our featured musicians of the evening, Skinshape. And this one is called Appropriately After Midnight. Back in a few minutes. It's Mike, Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia.
Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia 89.5 FM.
That's true. You are listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia 89.5 FM. And Amber House is a full-service getaway in historic Rocheport, where I live, as a matter of fact. Rocheport, Missouri, featuring multi-course meals from locally sourced foods and 4 individually designed suites, each with a fireplace and a jetted tub. Owners Dawson and Sherry look forward to personalizing each customer's stay. Pictures and more can be found at the Amber House Facebook page or at amberhousebb.com. And along with listener support, this program is brought to you by the owners of Columbia Storage, long-term supporters of KOPN. Columbia Storage, centrally located on College Avenue, just north of Paris Road, in the storage business for more than 30 years. More information available on their website, columbiastoragemo.com, or at 573-443-1599. Okay, back to business here with our friend Jonathan Zap, and we're going to get right back to it. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey.
All right, so let's talk about spiritual allies and or entities. I guess they can be the same or similar ideas. And then alternate selves and how that plays into it. But all, of course, in the context of our rabbit hole conversation.
Okay. And how much time do we have? Because this is a pretty vast subject.
Well, we got a half an hour. How about that? I
Okay.
won't stop you for half an hour.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right. Well, then that is enough to do at least some kind of a rant on that.
All right, good.
Well, so I mean, I've just been taking about a week off from Parallel Journeys to go through my 5,000 pages of notes on interdimensional relationships, many of which are dialogues with those interdimensional entities.
Yes.
Now, one of them does appear to have continuity with a deceased friend of mine, however, I do have to approach it from a phenomenological point of view, because even though there's a lot of evidence of a kind, when you know somebody well, you have a kind of holographic memory of them, and you can turn them into a subpersonality. Human beings are capable of generating subpersonalities. We see this with multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder or something. And but any fiction writer also has the experience where characters start to take on a life of their own and will sometimes do things highly inconvenient to the plot or to your contrary to your expectations. And I am a fiction writer, and I've had that experience. So when it comes to this deceased friend of mine, it would be so easy for me to create him as a character with my imagination and with my holographic memory of him and all the, artifacts I have, writings and photographs and so forth.
Yeah.
And however, there is also like a tremendous amount of paranormal experiences related to this, and in kind of impressive things, patternings that seem long before he was deceased to have prefigured this post-death relationship. And I'll give some of it, even though we probably talked about it in the last show, because part of the synchronicity is happening right now. I'm about to do a Gaia show on this. It was December. I just went through the notes and I found this. It was December, like just after Christmas of 2019, right around the time when we did a show together. When I realized, wow, I've been. It must have been like a week before that or something, because right around the time when you contacted me to be on the show. Yeah, we did the show right at the end of the year, like the 30th, I think it was.
Right.
So just before that, I suddenly realized, this was what most of my 2 years of rabbit hole writing sessions were about, this interdimensional communication stuff. And I realized, now I finally figured out enough about it that I could really talk about this. But I do nothing to market myself. I don't do anything. I don't call anybody up and ask them to have me on or anything. I just don't have the energy for that. Doing the actual work takes up all of my energy, plus living the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so within a day of having that realization, then you contacted me, and then the Gaia, George Norrie's Beyond Belief Gaia show contacted me, and then independent of them, his radio show, Coast to Coast, Lisa Lyons contacted me. So suddenly all these like venues were opening up for me to speak about this subject, that I did nothing to solicit them. And then when they came time to select a date for the Gaia show, the date that they selected was the birthday of my friend.
Huh.
Now, it turns out that this Saturday is not his birthday, because I asked to postpone it because we did a pretty strict quarantine. So they were kind enough to agree to postpone it, and now it's going to finally happen this Saturday.
Great.
But just to give you an idea on how it all like relates to parallel journeys and to all the weirdnesses, though I probably told some aspect of this anecdote in the previous show, but not everybody will have listened to that. But in 2006, I just wrote this little rant, like a 2-hour writing session called March 4th, A Mutant Manifesto. It was a pun on the date March 4th.
Yes, sure.
Because, FORTH, exclamation mark, instead of March 4th, FOURTH.
And the anniversary of La Chirera, certainly, yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
And anyway, in it, I just say stuff like, March 4th, mutants, break free from your wage slave bondage and, shackles of your wage slave bondage, and March 4th. It's kind of like this invocation, like, for mutants to break free from mundanity and, assert themselves.
Yes, I like it.
Anyway, so on March 4th, the date of 2008, a young person who I knew did not know me, I did not know them, they knew nothing of my writings, had what they described as a nervous breakdown, quit their job at a tax office, and marched forth. He just got on the next Greyhound bus going anywhere and ended up in Boulder, Colorado, and knocked on the door of the Boulder International Hostel where I was working at the time at the front desk.
Wow.
And then within the first 30 minutes of talking to him, it turned out that he was haunted by basically a simplified version of the same story I was writing, Parallel Journeys.
Wow. With
the same central character and the same idea. I don't want to give plot spoilers, but it was just like he had been obsessed by the same exact story. So it's sort of and he had a lot of, like, in his character and everything, a lot of connections to the story, and it would also turn out that he was like a genius poet, and other people who know more about poetry than I do, have looked at his poems and were just completely shocked at, like, how profound and soulful they were.
Wow.
And are. And anyway, so all kinds of, things that there were all kinds of extremely telepathic moments, and we talked about this while we were both still alive. There'd be these incredible telepathic moments, and including just before he took his own life. And I had no contact with him for 8 months before that. I had dreams that where he appeared in the lower astral, and that left me absolutely distraught. Like, one was like 10 days before his death, and one was like probably the night of.
Oh my gosh!
And anyway, so these paranormal phenomenon related happen, on an almost daily basis now. But I can't regard them as proving anything, because when paranormal things happen, it's almost impossible, if you're intellectually rigorous about it, to say what paranormal thing happened.
Right.
So for example, if he were to say to me, okay, pull out a quarter, and I want you to toss it 12 times, and just so you know that I'm real, and it's still me, I'm going to predict that it will be tails 12 times in a row. And now let's say I perform that experiment, and I toss the coin, and I get tails 12 times in a row. Did that prove that he still exists? Well, no, because I could have telekinetically influenced the coins.
Right.
Maybe I, had a moment of precognition. There's, in paranormal research, the strongest evidence is for short-term clairvoyance, and there's something in paranormal research called decision augmentation theory, where you may precognitively know the exact moment to conduct a certain experiment to get the result that you want, this kind of thing. So I do relate it relate to it phenomenologically, but I also relate to it from the moral grounding perspective. And I realized this, in the first few days of this post-death relationship that began very unexpectedly, that, two major possibilities. One is I'm making up a sub-personality. I'm making creating this out of my imagination. And the other, that it has continuity, that this is another agent, that has continuity, the soul or spirit of my deceased friend. So if it is him in that continuity sense, and I don't engage, that's clearly seems unethical and would be failing in my role as a friend and a mentor.
Agreed.
On the other hand, if it's not him, and I can't clearly and I have to accept the ambiguity. I can't conclude. There's no test I can perform to conclusively eliminate one of those versus the other. But
if you can apply moral grounding, dynamic paradoxicalism, the types of things we're talking about, then it can be managed. It can be balanced.
Right. I mean, and that's basically where I'm at. Is I have to accept the ambiguity, relate to it phenomenologically on its own terms, and go forward, and be ethical about it. Even if he is a subpersonality should still be treated well and ethically, and like independent agents. And I have a friend who is a philosophy professor and who did his PhD dissertation on multiple personality disorder. Because, and what are the ethics of that? Because there are these psychiatrists who would feel free to kill off certain of the alters that were more disruptive. And was that ethical?
Yeah.
Whether
that's scary stuff, Jonathan. The
right,
psychology and the mind and what they're capable of doing if they decide to be unethical, unreal.
Right, and I definitely recommend seeing a movie called Jonathan. Strangely enough, that has incredible, 20 synchronicities related to myself and my friend, even with the same names.
Wow.
Stuff, and it's about two psyches that share one body. So from an ethical point of view, if it is a subpersonality, that's still an interesting phenomenon, and it's not clear that there'd be any harm in my pursuing that relationship because it's not making me dysfunctional as a person. I'm not losing my reality testing. I'm not getting confused about what's in my checking account and so forth. Like I'm not. Right. I still have. It's not causing me to neglect my other relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it also, the other relationships don't take the place of this one, and it seems very symbiotic. For one thing, he's kind of a better writer than I am in some ways, so we're able to write kind of like with a 4-hemisphere brain, and so I think it's definitely helping with parallel journeys. And I have emails from the actual historical person where he said. Like 2 or 3 emails where he said, I really want to work with you on parallel journeys because, that maybe that will help me to write the story that's parallel to that I wanted to write and this kind of thing.
Wow.
And but for example, there was something where I didn't do something that I promised I was going to do, and he just withdrew his presence for like 3 or 4 hours. This was a few months ago, and I felt a shocking drop in my energy level. And even though during those 3 or 4 hours, a young, high-energy friend came over, it was no substitute for the kind of like doubled attention of like two psyches, aware of like, the sensorium, because I gave him permission. Some people this would be considered possession, but I gave him permission to like experience my entire life through my senses anytime he wanted to. And by the way, like the whole time, like another one of the weird synchronicities related to this is that like almost immediately after his death, and I posted something on Facebook, a woman who I never met, was one of my 2000 Facebook friends or something, said, do you really have to get this book, Suicide in the Afterlife? And somehow that title rang a bell, and I immediately ordered it. And in fact, I even arranged my flight so that, I would get the book from Amazon before I, flew to his hometown. And then it seemed like the book wasn't going to arrive. And I'm like, okay, I've got to leave. I've got to do these last minute errands. And I opened the door, and standing right in front of me is the UPS guy holding the package. And he only had one package with him. Usually I was in a big apartment building at the time where he had a whole cart full of packages. But he was just didn't even have a chance to knock on the door. I just opened it, and there was the book. And then that book became my guidebook that described so many of the things. It's written by a psychologist named John Climo. And on my last day at his hometown, there were all these sort of weird patterning related to the two-digit number 55, which seems very weak, because if you're looking for a two-digit number, it'll seem to be everywhere. But it was very prominent. I was 55 at the time. I was staying at a hostel where they changed the code. They changed the code to get in the two-digit code daily, and they changed the code to 55.
Okay.
I took a light rail train, and it was train number 55. And then I was watching the movie Oblivion, and in the middle of the movie I get a call from Lisa Lyons, the producer of Coast. That's a call I'll step out of a movie for, because it's a chance to be in Coast to Coast AM.
Yeah,
and she's
for sure.
calling up to say, hey, what are you doing this Sunday? We just had a last-minute cancellation. I'm like, oh, well, on Sunday I'm going to be flying to New York to visit with my mom. And she goes, well, we'll probably just keep calling around. What if your flight's canceled or something? We don't like to book people the same day as the flight. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And but anyway, so then I'm in New York, which I went to right after this, going to the funeral in my friend's hometown.
Yeah.
And suddenly it occurs to me, I wonder who they booked instead of me. and then I realized, wait a minute, Sunday, that was 5/5. That was May 5th, 5/5.
Yeah.
Well, they booked John Climo, the author of Suicide in the Afterlife.
Yeah.
He'd only been on once before.
Huh.
I'd been on many times before.
Yeah.
And he came on to talk about suicide in the afterlife, among other subjects.
I'll be damned.
But what does all that weird patterning mean? It's very hard to say.
Yes.
But, I mean, what most people who are sympathetic to this kind of research say is that, you're on to something. And it's very entertaining and very engaging. It's sort of like living in a fantasy novel. I mean, it's indistinguishable from that. And that's basically the most I can say about it. Is I'm in some kind of an interesting rabbit hole where I'm learning stuff, but I still have to be very careful not to come to too definite a conclusion, even though from a certain phenomenological and ethical point of view, he insists that I treat him as having historical continuity, and so as not to offend him, I do treat him that way.
That makes sense. What about imaginal portals? We've talked a little bit about bleeding over from these realms. What is an imaginal portal? Is that the way that you get into contact with these particular allies, entities, etc.?
Well, so I think that the imaginal is a real dimension, and you can even, this should be self-evident, really. If I say, for example, imagine a pink elephant, we talked about this, and people do, then it's a factual actuality that they imagine that pink elephant at that particular moment.
Yes.
But the imaginal seems to be a far more potent dimension than even something like that would suggest. And so the imaginal can be used like that. That's a place where I can communicate better with my friend. So, for example, we can create an imaginal scenario. It doesn't have to be the room in which I'm typing on the computer. We can go back and be like, okay, let's go back to the room that we hung out in, in 2008.
Yeah, I get it.
And go back to that exact scene where we had that conversation, but now we're going to have the conversation differently. And when early on in this post-death relationship, I would ask myself, is this a personality I'm creating, and how much is it actually him? I went to random.org. I got 36 for my imagination and 64 for it being him. And what was interesting is that those two numbers add up to 100,
Right.
so it's as if every percentage point was accounted for.
Right.
64 is also the number of hexagrams in the I Ching, so it seemed like a very totality number. But later, I actually talked about that, because it's so many times it felt like I was just projecting, my version of him. And he said, well, of course you were. He called it my Technicolor spotlight. He said, for a lot of those early days, I was in a very depressed and yin kind of place, and low energy. And so when you would project onto me, it was like this Technicolor spotlight that gave me a lot of energy, and then I could step into that spotlight and inhabit that role, but you couldn't get me to say something that, because I always had that ventriloquism fear of am I getting him to say stuff like that?
Yeah.
And it's also because it's very confusing with a kind of a telepathic melding, because if it's convenient, he can use some of my word-making ability to, put it into more thinking-type terms and stuff like that. But he'll often say that.
Jonathan, is there a ritual, or is it ceremonial, or is there a process or a procedure that you go through in order to get into that particular state where you're communicating, or is it almost instantaneous where you can just kind of be like, okay, like he's right there almost?
It can happen at very unexpected times where I'm not doing anything, and there's he'll just pop up. And I've had this experience with the one other interdimensional ally who is not somebody I knew historically, as far as I know, is it where they can just suddenly emerge very powerfully in certain circumstances. Travel is one of them. I mean, basically the ritual is me showing up at the computer and having a written dialogue is the main thing. But also my study is set up to look like a very surreal portal with like low lights and a lot of like surreal colored lights and things like that. So it's a conducive environment. But I mean, it just, giving it attention is usually enough to establish contact. But for example, I had a long periods of time where I felt like he was gone or had moved on. And I was I was in Paris with a friend of mine, and it was like the anniversary of his death or something, and I was going to light a candle. But I'm like, I don't even know why I'm bothering. I haven't heard from him in months, and so forth. It felt like he was gone. But then that night, I had a dream in which I'm shown a dorm room, and almost as like a college dorm room, and it's completely dominated by a large bed and then an extremely large TV that takes up a whole wall. And after that dream, I'm like, it almost seemed like a metaphor for maybe he's just silently watching. And then that day, my friend had to go to visit a relative that was temporarily in Paris, and I decided that would be the day I would go to the catacombs. And nothing prepared me for how intense the catacombs were. But I was just waiting online, looking through my phone or something, and suddenly, just as clear as a bell, and completely unexpectedly, and it was also when he would appear, it would be spatially distinct. Okay, he's there, off in the right-hand corner of the room, and this kind of thing. Even if I couldn't always clearly visualize him, or there'd have to be a certain cooperation to create the visualization. But he sort of broke through, and I hadn't heard from him in such a long time, and he's just this is the closest you're ever going to get to seeing what it's like in the lower astral. And he just said that with such authority, and his presence was so intense and very serious. And then I go down this long spiral staircase, and nothing prepares you for how intense the catacombs are. There's 6 million skeletons in this vast underground labyrinth. And it was an extremely powerful experience.
Yeah. Wow.
So there are situations, and I had this happen, and this relates to some of the creation of new scenes and parallel journeys, where I felt very intuitively drawn to go to Tucson to the Gem and Mineral Show, even though it seemed like a very impractical and unnecessary thing to do. And pretty much as soon as I got off the bus, this was shortly before the death of my friend, the other interdimensional companion that I've been with me since age 10 or 11, immediately came forward, and immediately whole chapters of parallel journey started playing out. And then I was going to go to Oracle, Arizona to see Biosphere 2, because the previous time I had been there, in 1999, I just went there any other tourist because I heard about this thing. I had this intensely emotional reaction to it. I mean, here's this weird sci-fi complex, and I'm like, why? And it felt like memories. And I assumed that like these memories that felt so emotional was like because of the poignant experiences of the biospherians who lived there.
Perhaps, yeah.
But when I actually read every book written about the biosphere by biospherians, and even met one of them, and saw a documentary recently about them. And I don't think that was it, because they're people that would really have annoyed me if I knew them. But it was like I had this just powerful emotional feeling. It was very nonspecific, but as if I had lived an alternate life in like some kind of biosphere or something. And then in 2013, I step out of my rented car, and like between the parking lot and entering the biosphere, like an entire huge section of Parallel Journeys just played out. A whole scenario and so forth. It's central to the story now and begins the whole book now. And it's just like, I don't know where that came from, but it just appeared. And so, and with the presence of this other interdimensional ally that I experienced sometimes coming forward very distinctly when I would be in an exotic new place, like when I toured the Mayan ruins with John Jenkins, this entity that I hadn't
that had to be awesome, by the way.
What's that?
That had to be awesome, by the way.
Yeah, it was. I wrote about it, and it was called Vision at Chichen Itza. And it's got pictures of me and John and the president of the Mayan Studies Society. But some very paranormal things happened on that trip. But one of them was, before I had a vision at Chichen Itza, that was very dark, was just the intense presence of this interdimensional ally, because it was as if, being in a very novel place, he wanted to experience that with me. And so I wasn't expecting that or summoning him or anything, but he just appeared so vividly and was just very present during that whole trip.
Wow. Amazing. Well, Jonathan, I think we've come to about that time. I was going to ask you about Leonardo da Vinci and talk a little bit about that as an interdimensional relationship.
Yeah, well, what I decided to do is I sort of, it was like a chaos magic ritual. I did a transtemporal phone call with Leonardo da Vinci. It's part of my rabbit hole navigation playlist on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And I just tried to explain to Leonardo just the basics that, any educated layman has learned from science, because I figured that if anybody should be able to handle the rabbit hole of like what modern science has revealed in the last almost 500 years since his death. It should be Leonardo, because nobody else reached both the pinnacle of art and science before or since.
I agree. He was absolutely
Isaacson biography.
One of my favorites.
This.
Yes, I agree.
But then Leonardo kind of freaked out by some aspects of it, like exploding stars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So even Leonardo had limitations in his ability to handle the rabbit hole of what we, as modern educated people, accept from science.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would seem like in either case, if we were able to go back to the time of Leonardo da Vinci and what it might actually be like compared to what we read in history books, etc., and also the reverse, what it would be like to know and see what it's like now. Amazing. So John, what about for people who actually have these experiences? I think this is great because there may be people that are having conversations with alternative selves, with interdimensional allies. But is there an opposite side of it as well? I guess we should probably ask that really quickly. It can be dangerous, perhaps, if you get the wrong.
Extremely dangerous.
Yeah. So
and there's a whole category on my website that you go. There's like a telescope navigator bar, and one of those categories is mind parasites.
We've done. Years ago we did a show on that.
Right.
I think it was 10 or 12 years ago. But yes.
Right. So they can be extremely dangerous, and there are all kinds of tricksters out there in the interdimensional realms or the lower astral or whatever you might believe that they might be sourced from, and so that's part of the whole point. When in my recent stuff on interdimensional relationships, I've emphasized the symbiotic aspect, but I have vast writings about the dangers and how dark that can be. People can read something called The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts also on my website that tells the story of paranormal researcher Joe Fisher and how he was, destroyed by interdimensional entities
What a
that were
title.
quite evidential, but were dark.
Well, and I guess that's why we've talked about all these skills and tools that you can use in order to minimize the potential of that type of thing happening,
Right. I've just been very lucky that, like, my two main interdimensional friends have been quite reliable and benign for the most part.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to read something here really quickly. I grabbed a slide from one of your rabbit hole videos, and it's a great synopsis of what we've talked about. And I think that if I would have read it 2 weeks ago, I would not have understood very well what it meant. And if I read it tonight, I do. And I hope that the people that are listening can feel the same way. It goes like this. Follow the path of numinous into rabbit holes, aware that you'll be surrounded by the carnival funhouse mirrors of your own psyche, tricksters, and other psyches. Using your moral grounding, reality testing, and true skepticism, your phenomenology perspective, imaginal portals, depth psychology, dynamic relation to paradoxes, and worthy allies to stay oriented. I love it, Jonathan.
Well, I guess we covered all of that. So
I think we did.
That was the rabbit hole nugget within the rabbit hole videos.
Well, it is. It's excellent, and it's a great synopsis of what we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, and I'm thrilled that we had the chance to do it. And we'll come up with another reason to do it sometime here in the near future, okay?
Well, we were about to enter such a political rabbit hole. I mean, we're in it already.
Oh, my gosh.
With the pandemic and the election and so forth. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of real-time events to comment on anytime you want me to.
Dude, I feel like we're like circling a black hole. I mean, I feel like it is just a runaway train, dark, stormy night, all of those metaphors.
But it's fascinating, too.
That's
if you're not unemployed and, homeless or something like that.
I agree with that, too.
I'm in a privileged position, but it's extremely fascinating to observe.
I agree as well. Well, we'll watch it, and we'll talk about it down the road here, okay?
Okay.
All right, John, thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon. All right.
Take care.
Wonderful. Jonathan Zap on the web, once again, at Zap Oracle, Zaporacle, zaporacle.com. You can always link up to Jonathan through my website at mikehagan.com, through the archives. His picture and links to his website will be on the front page for another week or so. And also remember, Jonathan Zap at hotmail.com if you're interested in a copy of the beta, at least, for his most recent and upcoming novel. I guess it's the only real novel that he's been working on for many, many years, called Parallel Journeys. All right, everybody, Jonathan Zap one more time. All right, it is Mike, and you're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. And we're going to close out of here with one from Skinshape called In the End, appropriately. And we'll come back and talk with you next week. I'm not sure what we're going to do next week. I haven't been planning things out very far ahead, to be honest, because things are changing so quickly, and things are changing at the radio station all the time. And to be honest, my motivation hasn't been up to snuff for quite a while. In fact, the show last week with Jonathan was one that sort of revitalized me a little bit, and this one tonight did as well. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the time that he spends with us whenever he does. And I'll keep trying to do my best for y'all in a really weird time. This year has been, I've had some strange years, but this one has been about tops, and it can be taxing and hard, frustrating, and debilitating even at times. So keep that in mind, everyone. I know it happens to others if it happens to me. And a lot of things that Jonathan and I talked about over the last couple of weeks can be helpful with some of this stuff, I think. So at any rate, time to say adios. This one is called In the End. It's Skinshape. Once again, thank you to Jonathan Zap. Thanks for the music to William Dory. And thanks to y'all for listening. Come on back next week. In the meantime, be cool to yourself and to other people, okay? All right, it's Mike, and I'll catch y'all later.
Thank